And any tips on what you can do to shift from one to the other?
A couple very tactical ideas here.
Great.
How quickly can you get to shared of
Mm,
whatever it is that you're chasing? Any one of those four mandates or maybe others works that you can then begin very tactically shopping around the executive leadership team.
Adam, it is great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us. Where are you joining us from today?
I am in Brooklyn, New York,
Ah,
center
very
of the
cool.
universe.
Right, right. I've heard them say that in Brooklyn. Cool. I'm very excited to dive into the topic, but just to kind of set it up, I think it's helpful for us to start off with what strategy is. And we always ask people this, and we get a different answer every time. So certainly there's no right answer. How do you define strategy?
That's great. Well, I'm so glad to be here, Kaihan. Thank you for the chance to have this conversation together. It's one I think that we've been having kind of on and off for many years
Mm-hmm.
about building a strategy office, and specifically in the context of a growth stage organization.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I think about strategy, I think of it as, and I'm sort of curious to hear or read all of the answers you've gotten to this. I think that could
Mm-hmm.
be a great little essay. I think of it as defining two things. First, what we want to achieve in our target end outcome in success, what we believe we can achieve. And depending on the enterprise, that might be from a commercial standpoint, from an enterprise value standpoint. In the Outthinker network that you lead, you also have some folks who are coming from not-for-profits, where a
Mm-hmm.
significant part of that end state is about the social impact that they're going to have. Actually, in our organization, which is an education technology company, we think about it as both of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then second, establishing the commitments that will maximize our chances of success in achieving that outcome. And those commitments could be commitments on our product roadmap. They could be commitments to build new capabilities, to seek acquisitions or partners in specific categories, to shift our selling motions, all different kinds of commitments. But what are the things that we are going to do to
Yeah.
maximize our chances of success in reaching that endpoint?
Yeah.
And then, of course, both those things, once defined, need continuous evaluation in the context of company performance, in the context of market conditions, in the context of competitor actions and user needs, and changing customer dynamics.
Got it. No, I love this, the concept of commitments. There's a kind of a whole kind of theory of strategy as leadership as commitments. And this is the first time of the 200 times I think that we've asked that question that we've heard someone actually use the word commitments. Makes a lot of sense. By commitments, just give us a sense of what you mean by commitment.
So I think it is those pieces, the what we are going to do, which could
Mm-hmm.
be we are going to build a new product, we are going to build a new feature at a very granular level by this date. We are going to seek acquisitions to enter these adjacent markets over this time frame and in these particular categories. We are going to shift from our traditional selling motion, which may look like a top-down enterprise motion, to one that is supported by product-led growth. We are, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What are the
Yes.
big changes that we're committing to make across all of our functions in a company to serve
Yes.
maximizing our chances of success and getting to that end state?
Yes. So I'm hearing that those get locked in and in KPIs, in kind of formal statements of priorities, and in resource allocation. That's sort of how we lock those in.
I think as it
Yep. Yep.
cascades through the
Yep.
organization, that's
Yep.
exactly right.
Got it.
And that, particularly my background is in growth stage, so I'm
Mm-hmm.
coming at it from a certain perspective. But all of those pieces can move pretty quickly in a
Yeah.
fast-growing company in a dynamic market. And so we want to create the right processes for continuous reevaluation.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to create a culture in which it's accepted that we have great clarity about our end targets and our commitments, and we are going to evaluate those pragmatically in light of how the world is changing.
Yes. Now we're going to be talking generally about growth stage strategy. However, you're speaking from the context of Amplify. So could you maybe just give us a little bit of background on Amplify?
Absolutely. So we are a next generation education technology company working in curriculum and assessment. We serve about half of K-8 students in the US, and we're actually
Wow.
now expanding into high school across reading, writing, science, and mathematics.
Got it. And can you give us any sense? I don't know what you're willing to share, but I don't know, kind of your revenue or employee or customer growth kind of history.
I think I can't add
Yeah,
too much
sure,
more
sure,
there
absolutely. Okay,
without a
all right.
bunch
We'll
of
we'll
checks.
we'll,
We
we'll
usually
cut that
don't
out. We'll cut
share.
that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll cut that out entirely. But
The, the
that
sort of
shows scale.
headline
Yeah,
stat on
yeah,
half is, I think,
yeah.
gives a sense of scale.
Yeah, that headline's enough. Okay, so we'll just cut that out. Perfect. Sorry, we didn't talk about those questions, and so,
No,
but
no, no,
I
it's all
just
good.
remember that I
It's all
wanted
good.
them to want
Offline
people
with
to see
you,
it.
I definitely
Yeah,
can
I
share
know.
that,
Sure.
but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
just
Okay, great, great, great. Okay, excellent. So let's then talk about as you and I have talked about before. There's kind of like the very early stages. This kind of these kind of commitments kind of exist in a CEO's head, but there is a point at which it gets formalized, and somebody says, I don't know if the CEO or the board says, we need a strategy officer or
right.
we need a strategy office. But what do you think that they're looking for at that moment?
So my sense is that it is often poorly defined.
Yeah.
That there's, I know there's loads of frameworks for this, so I'm going to throw one at you, Kyan, and I
Great.
want you to
I
beat
love
it up.
framers.
But that there is some set of presenting needs that actually vary across a pretty big spectrum when folks say, we need a strategy, we need a strategy office, we need a strategy team. And my way right now of thinking about that range of needs is that there's sort of four big categories. Um, and I've broken it down for myself when I
Mm-hmm.
when I talk to companies that are in this moment as we need a compass, we need a plan, we need a process, or we need intelligence. And
Mm.
in those four presenting needs, I don't think it's ever just one of them, but it tends to be that when a company wakes up and says, we need a strategy, we need a strategy team, there's one of those four, and talk about kind of how I think about each of them in a second,
Yes.
that they're really focused on, that is underneath that statement. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, so the first one, we need a compass. I think that's when the company has driven growth opportunistically, but hasn't yet solidified that target endpoint, that true north we were talking about in the definition of strategy,
Mm-hmm.
what the enterprise needs to achieve and why it's feasible.
Mm-hmm.
Second one,
Is
oh,
that
you
so?
want to
Yeah,
go
yeah.
on that?
So
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to get you to pull on that. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So there's a kind of the opportunistic is sort of looking for near term opportunity. Like it's almost like a journey, and you get to the end of it, and like, how did we get here? We just followed that stream and that field, and now we're here. And now, where does that continue to take us now? Right.
And legitimately, we may not have had up till that point in the maturity of the company
Yeah.
the luxury of being able to think this long term.
Why did you say luxury? I thought we were going to say need. Why did you say luxury?
Well, maybe it's a need and a
Yeah, yeah,
luxury.
sure,
Having
sure. Yeah,
having lived
no, but
through both
yeah,
stages, let's say it
yeah.
can feel like a luxury. Um, Having sufficient clarity and scale and product market fit in one or
Hmm.
more areas,
Yeah.
that the question of what are we going to be doing in 5 years, in 10 years,
Hmm.
rather than in 1 or 2 years
Hmm.
or in 6 months becomes very relevant. I
Yes.
think that is a need. I also think when you reach that stage, it can feel a new challenge, a new, hill to climb, but something of a luxury to have reached that
Yes.
moment in a company.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Got it. Okay, great. You could dig further on there, but I'm curious to hear about the next one, the plan.
So yeah, so we need a plan. So this is, I think, one of the common things that sits underneath that. I want a strategy team officer. I think it's when organizations have a relatively well broadly understood end outcome in mind, but
Hmm.
haven't defined the commitments that will get us there. So the real role of each function, each department, each product in delivering that end state, the from here to there, isn't
Hmm.
well defined. And we need to bring the organization together to answer that question.
Hmm. Yes. And so what does it look like when the CEO or the board, whoever it is that says we need a strategy office, what do they see that triggers the realization that they need a plan? as you're defining.
I think at the board level, it is often a shared aspiration that folks have stacked hands on. But seeing in the major executives at the company, depending on different examples I'm kind of running through here, or the planned trajectory of different products, that they don't seem to be flying in formation
Hmm.
towards that shared end outcome.
Hmm. Yes, I gotcha. Yeah, so maybe yeah, there's just sort of like they're out of sync. Even if they are kind of like aligned, they aren't coordinated. Sort of like so there's inefficiency there. I'm picturing birds flying and their wings are going at different paces or something like
That's
that.
right.
Okay, for got it.
Um,
Yeah,
so third one,
process. Yeah.
we need a process. Uh, we have a company with a relatively well-defined strategy, but it kind of exists and a sense of what the commitments are to get there, but it kind of exists in the executive office or it exists on the leadership team, maybe. Um, but we've grown substantially and we haven't created the infrastructure to translate those enterprise commitments to the real work that gets done day to day in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the kind of translational work from the big ideas into what happens day to day. And the tools for that are often goals, key performance indicators. Um, and saying that can feel pretty superficial and straightforward. The real work to um, turn meaningful, not generic, commitments into KPIs, goals that then cascade in a muscular way down through the organization. I think in
Mm-hmm.
a company of any size, anybody who's tried to do that work would say it is an enormous lift in change management.
Two follow-up questions before we go to intelligence. Why did you say meaningful as distinct from generic?
Um, I think that there is always, when you're addressing a full organization and presenting the goals and commitments of the company, a temptation to describe all the work that everybody is doing. You're sitting in the big meeting and you want to say something that everybody can see themselves in,
Mm-hmm.
and that nobody's going to go back to their desk and say, well, I wasn't really mentioned there.
Uh-huh.
In
Right.
the process of doing that, though, you end up kind of muddling, blurring, um, making the strategy, outcome, and commitments far less sharp. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you create that true north for the organization, our end outcome, our commitments, in a way that is sharp, that folks can see themselves in at the right level, and then that translates in to real tactics and performance outputs and outcomes that we're going to expect of our teams and hold them to.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I got you.
And
Yes,
how do we make that whole process feel like it's adding value, giving clarity, motivating, developmental, not a bunch of
momentum.
check the box bureaucracy stuff?
Yes, yes, I love it. I love it. So, second follow-up question on there is, I can imagine someone, a successful company that reached the scale that Amplify reached when it decided to create a formal strategy office. They've found product market fit. They're growing. They're like, in their world, they're killing it. And certainly they must have had some kind of methodology or process. So what do you think happens? I'm very visual, so I'm picturing a plane and it kind of takes off, but then like to reach the next level of altitude, there's some turbulence. I'm thinking that there's something that happens where the way that we did it is no longer working for the way we need to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. The turbulence to me that happens is we have a larger organization. We
Mm-hmm.
have more people running against our ambitions and our challenges, and they're starting to run into each other
Uh-huh.
because we don't have shared substantive belief about the end outcome or commitments we're trying to achieve. We
Mm-hmm.
haven't translated that to the organization. We haven't held our executives on down accountable for their roles in that shared vision.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so as we become bigger, as our opportunities become larger, as our customers grow in scale, we are
Yes.
all just doing more. And what had felt like a very tight, everybody does everything sometime often, right? Kind of
Hmm.
generalist ride for the first couple of years of a company can then become quite turbulent as you expand scale across all of those
Yes.
dimensions if you don't have the structure to manage that turbulence.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, I can visualize that. I can visualize that. There's sort of like a mechanism that worked up to a certain scale, which is maybe us all in the same room and talking a lot with each other and knowing what
Right,
everyone's
right, right.
doing, and then the processing volume needed to maintain that, it kind of breaks down once you hit that exponential point. Okay, got it. Process, and then talk to me about intelligence.
Yeah, I think this is probably the least common one. So this is the fourth one. And again,
Mm-hmm.
I want you to beat up my little framework here.
Okay.
But intelligence to me is the presenting problem is there are gaps in our underlying knowledge of the space that we're operating in. And we need an expert who can help us evaluate opportunities more rigorously and comprehensively in our market context than we're capable of doing today.
Mm-hmm.
We are interested in this adjacency. We are interested in punching up into the next level of customer. We are trying to understand why we're hitting a wall in certain
Mm-hmm.
new markets that we've been pursuing after having been so successful in other markets. Those are the kind of issues where somebody says, we just, hold on, we don't understand actually what we're up against here. We need
Mm-hmm.
somebody with the experience, network, background, and access to market intelligence to help us
I
unlock some
see.
of those opportunities.
I see. I'm like kind of like listening and uh, processing external information so that it could, because I do think that that's very common, right? Like a company reaches a certain scale and it starts becoming inwardly looking. It starts becoming
Hmm.
myopically operated because so much of its attention needs to be looking at just operating, right?
Right.
And so you take your eye off the ball out there. I got it. No, I like the methodology. The one thing I would like say, two things I would say is we got to figure out a way. You got to figure out a way to make it spell something because right now it says sip a pee, right?
Does it
Like
spell something crazy? I didn't even think
so
about that.
something.
Okay.
But the other thing I was thinking is like I do think that maybe companies we've talked about kind of the journey of the scale, and there's a point where you need to now formalize these things, but I think there's also like a cycle, right? And maybe these kind of fit into a cycle. Sometimes companies are they've got their compass, they got their plan, and it's just all process. We need to execute, and then I'll see. Then the
Right.
company says, "Oh, wait a second! Now we've maxed out our TAM, and now or something's changed externally. Where do we go next, or what's the next thing to add on?" Then we go to compass. So I would think that like a different stages in the cycle, different of these are more important than the others.
I think that's
That makes
right.
sense.
I think that's right. And recognizing that it's healthy and natural that we're going back and forth among these four,
Yeah.
as long as we can be really clear about what we're trying to solve for.
Yes. Do you think this framework also is a good one for assessing what a strategy office does or should do?
I think
You think so?
so. I mean, I think that um, when I see a new strategy team in a growth stage company, um, I think it is, again, often very poorly defined up front. What is the mandate? What is the reason? And so the first job for that executive, and maybe, in a lot of cases, um, an early stumbling block for many of us might be working with executive leadership to define the role around which one of those, four needs it is genuinely serving out of the gate. Um,
Okay.
in a lot of cases, as we said, I think it should serve in different seasons, all and many, many and likely all of those goals. But we need to get really clear on the underlying expectation out of the gate. And then I think as a strategy office, the second thing you have to do out of the gate is figure out what the teeth are going to be to action that mandate. So I don't think you can pick up, we need a compass, we need a target end outcome, and kind of go around and talk to people about that and advise. And you might have actually a lot of great insight in doing that. But if you're just flitting in and out of email threads and meetings and Slack channels, whatever, with commentary, however like insightful that is, that's
Mhm.
not going to get us there. You need to drive a process, I think, that is visible and high stakes for the leadership team. And, to me, I think visible means it's deeply engaged with the line business and functional leaders. It's connected to the real work. And
Mhm.
high stakes mean there's a shared accountability across the executive team to getting it right. That shared accountability might be we have something to deliver to our board. It might be we need to lock our revised forecast and we're going to live by it once we lock it and once we make those
Mhm.
capital allocation decisions. It might be any number of things, but I think you need visibility, process, and teeth. Otherwise, what I often see in these early stages of strategy office is a lot of interesting, good, insightful, well-intentioned work that is sort of unmoored from
Yes.
any central structure. And
Yes.
over time, as a result of that, risks losing credibility at a minimum and, at a maximum, just not achieving the outcome.
Yeah, I can't think of what the next question is, but I just want to share what's going through my head is this. I love
Mhm.
this idea of teeth and this distinction between that smart advisor that's offering commentary and insights versus the person that has the teeth that is actually like in the machine and influencing what actually happens, because strategy is what you do, not what you say you're going to do. And you've already kind of, you may have already answered this, visibility and high stakes, but maybe could make it a little more tangible for us. What are some things that a strategy officer that finds themselves in this kind of, they listen to me sometimes when I'm very eloquent, um, to being in there. And any tips on what you can do to shift from one to the other?
Um, a couple very tactical ideas here.
Great, love them.
How quickly can you get to shared artifacts of
Mm,
whatever it is that you're chasing, any one of those four mandates or maybe others works that you can then begin very tactically shopping around the executive leadership team to begin to build alignment, but in the first place, actually to really beat them up, to really put them up against if it's your planned commitments, your end outcome, the realities of the business.
yeah.
Um, that makes the work visible. It makes it something iterative that everybody is working on. Teeth,
Mm,
I would say, how quickly can you work with, and here it is probably the CEO, the president, in some cases directly with the board on establishing a set of expectations that are going to put productive, appropriate pressure on the executive leadership team to uh, sign off by a date certain on
mm-hmm.
some of this work, even if it is, permanently in draft form in the sense that we are going to review and refresh it on a routine cycle, on maybe even a near continuous cycle. How can you put a forcing mechanism in place that then
Mm-hmm.
everybody is tied to the outcome of
Mm-hmm.
defining our true north compass, of a roadmap of our capability, product, and so on commitments, of when we are going to have an effective process in place for cascading those commitments through the organization and visibility into how we're hitting our goals or not.
Yes, got it. I love it. Yeah. Um, yeah, we could do a whole podcast just on those techniques and just probably like a nice, interesting menu. But we have other things that we want to cover. Now, you've mentioned CEO, you've mentioned board, and so it just raises the question: is what's the purpose of the strategy officer, or who does the strategy office serve? Because it could be the board, could be the investors, it could be employees, it could be customers. How do you think about that?
Well, we're all ultimately serving our managers, our board, our shareholders.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that means we are serving the organization. And I think this question of serve is a really um, interesting and important one to focus on. Again, my vantage point is coming from the growth stage, not from the um, you know, uh, uh, very that sort of vaunted um, large strategy offices at the PepsiCos and
Mhm.
Amex SPG and so on of the world. But in a growth stage, um, I think it is important that the strategy office, to get the value of it across those four areas, be um, collaborative, but also activist. And I think when to think about sort of the opposite of that stance would either be siloed or purely an order taker.
Mhm.
And uh, by collaborative, I mean, as we've been talking about, working closely with your direct colleagues, not getting stuck up in the world of an executive office and not getting
Okay.
nested from an org standpoint, like lines and boxes within a corp dev team that's reporting to a CFO, that's reporting to a blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
Um, I think that from a activist standpoint, um, that means serving the organization, not serving the individual incentives of specific departments and functions. The strategy role in a growth stage company is one of the few in the organization that has the opportunity to see across
Yes.
the entire scope of the organization.
Entire system.
Um,
Yes.
and and when I think it goes wrong is when you become a project-based order taker for individual functions. Maybe that's a different version of it.
Hmm.
It is maybe a replacement for external consulting in some respects,
Right.
but I'm not sure that in your typical growth stage organization, when someone wakes up and says, "We need a strategy office," it is that. I think
Yes.
it is more often an activist perspective that is going to be collaborative and grounded in the real business, but is ultimately an advocate for getting to the right answer for the whole organization across one
I
or more
love
of
that.
those couple things:
I
the
love that.
compass,
Yeah.
the process, the commitments,
Yeah. I
the
think that's
market.
such an important point that I think people who aren't in the role sometimes underappreciate is that it's the right it's the right answer in part because all these other stakeholders believe it's the right answer. You can have the perfect strategy, but if it's not aligning, if the CEO doesn't say yes, I want it for this reason, and the investors don't say yes, we want it for the growth, and the board doesn't, we say yes because it protects our downside, and employees don't say yes because it gives us more fulfilling work, and customers don't, you know what I mean? It is interesting, and you being one of the few people whose role is like, the CEO should, and there are many people who have that top management perspective who can see the whole system, but you as the strategist, it is your role to understand all the interconnections of the system. It's very unique. It does mean that you have to say no to some things, I think, right? Like I can imagine a CEO says, Adam, I want you to become the chief strategy officer, and here's what I want. And then you find out, actually talking to the board and talking to customers and other division heads, that actually, like, we should be doing something different. So I just want to know, like, how do you think, or how could someone think about what to take on, what not to take on, so they don't become the order taker?
Right, right. I think it is, um, I think it's really about defining the mandate and phasing the mandate.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, like almost any executive role, getting really clear about uh, what we're going to tackle first, second, and third, and what changes the organization and the executives and board who have chosen to create this office should expect on what timeline.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we can't tackle all four of those big things that we talked about at the start all at once. And I think very few of us are probably ever good at doing all four of those at once, speaking for myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of it is about the phasing of those pieces, and then a really candid and continuous conversation. Ideally, if you are effective in your role and seen as somebody who is driving change and being effective, there will be more demand for the work of the strategy office. And
Mm-hmm.
taking that demand and filtering it through a really candid conversation about whether it's genuinely serving the organization's needs across one of those key areas that you've agreed to in your mandate for this office up front,
Yeah.
to me, that's the work.
Yeah.
Um, and reserving rights to be really candid when something seems like it is not a fit because it's about the particular incentives and needs maybe of one department, not about serving the broader organization.
Yes. Yes. I love it. Yeah. Yeah. We had one of your fellow outthinkers, chief strategy officers on, Michael Drexler, and he kind of has this very clear thing, which is like, is it good for the company? Is it, are we the right people to do it and all this stuff? But then he has this other one, which is a get out of jail free card, which is if the person that's asking for it is maybe a stakeholder that doesn't use you, there's not a lot of demand from them, and we need them, and they're asking, maybe we'll do it anyway in order to engage them and get them to experience like what we can do.
Yeah.
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 Fair.
Yeah. I think that in a role that relies, again, I think there needs to be real teeth, but in a role that relies heavily on influence, those are the kind of trade-offs you're
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm going to ask you a question about how strategy officers should be judged, but it's just like what you said, just is clicking for me, is maybe the difference between an external consultant and an internal strategy officer is that your relationships are much longer, um, by design, right? And so you can think about that kind of human stakeholder, long term kind of stakeholder building. Um, I'm not thinking of the right term. I'm thinking customer lifetime value, but internal customer, like your
Uh-huh.
customer is with you for a longer time. So that's a different type of game
That's
that
right.
you
And
play.
you are living the reality of execution.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yes. A lot of strategy officers like who do come from consulting, when they do, that's what they're after, is that experience of the execution
Hmm.
and following
Hmm.
through and living with it. Was that how was that for you? Because you also at some point were a consultant. You were in, especially within organizational
Yeah.
consulting. Is that what brought you to the strategy officer, and what role, and what and was that opportunity to see through execution part of the motivation?
Absolutely part of the motivation. Really, the motivation was to be part of a company that was doing something that I believed in
Uh-huh.
and where we had the opportunity to uh, reach a really significant scale of impact and enterprise
Awesome.
value growth doing that. So that was
Awesome.
really the fundamental motivation. I think that there is a lot of hemming and hawing, especially in the consulting world, on strategy versus operational
Mm-hmm.
experience, execution, and so on. But fundamentally, that's what I was really after.
Yeah.
Um, and as one of our colleagues in the Outthinker Network said to me once, like the great there's many great challenges for the strategy officer in a company. One of the great benefits is you don't work on anything boring.
Yes. Great
You
point.
are constantly working on issues of uh, real significant stakes for the enterprise of your customers and your people.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yes. Great point. Love it. How should a strategy office's success be judged or measured? Like I imagine that it's easier for me to measure sales, marketing, operations. I can think of the very clear isolated metrics here. And when you're negotiating what that role is up front, I imagine a big part of it is negotiating what success is defined by. So how should a strategy or a company that's building a strategy officer or a strategy officer think about that measure?
Yeah, I'd actually like you to educate me maybe, Kyan, sometime about the literature and the thinking on this. But I see sort of like two disappointing ways to do it, and then one way that I think, while imperfect, feels like the right one
Okay,
to me.
great.
Disappointing ways. It's all about the long-term value creation of the strategy for the enterprise. What's disappointing about that is it's going to take years in most cases to really um, be evidenced in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we should have incentives aligned to that long-term outcome, but making it the sole judge feels really minimal. Another disappointing one that I hear is sort of output based. It's like we did 5 projects. Oh no, we got 7 projects done. Our internal stakeholders rated it this way. That seems like it doesn't live up to the greatest ambitions of what the role, aspirations of what the role can do for a company.
Mm-hmm. I
Um,
could see it lead to a lot of a lot of gaming or a lot of misalignment of of activities too.
and potentially
Yeah.
an order taker mindset rather
Yeah.
than
Right.
one that is rooted in what's good for the full organization.
Great
So,
point.
um, uh, at the risk of being a little broken record on this, I think that getting the right judgment of the quality of the function rests in that upfront mandate definition. If you could say that what we are working on out of the gate in launching a new office is we need a shared compass for the future. Okay, now we can judge, um,
Hmm.
did we define that? Did If you go and ask our board, can they all say it the same way? Are they lined up on it? If you ask our people in the organization, um, are they aware of what that is? Have we communicated it effectively? Are they aware of how it connects to their work?
Yes.
These are all things that we can judge and measure against that mandate. And I think the other mandates that we talked about that you might flow into from there or potentially even start with have similar ways of assessing the impact that we're having
Mm-hmm.
in year that are related to the substantive thing we're trying to achieve, not sort of output based and not waiting for 5 years from now to see what happens.
Yes. Got it. That's great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you're kind of like setting the context for your success by having your mandate, that be part of the mandate, clarity on role, what we do, what we won't do, which of these four. What else do you think has to be in place for a strategy office to succeed?
So I think we've talked about a couple of these so far, but one is just organizational in the lines and boxes of it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I think one big area of risk is either getting too high or too low in the organization. I describe too high as I see, I've had colleagues, friends who end up in versions of a strategy office that is sort of an extension of an executive office that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't come into a lot of contact day to day with the executive leadership team, doesn't sort of serve in that body, is more of a dotted, a line off to the side of the executive um, and therefore doesn't come into contact with the lived reality of building, selling, implementing, running the company.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other version of a kind of org structure challenge that I've seen is the nested strategy office, where it gets sort of put too low in the organization and nested within a number of other functions, and therefore doesn't have the visibility and isn't established as a genuine peer to the executive leadership team
Mm-hmm.
to do the work it needs to do and have the scope it needs to have across the full org.
Yes.
Um, so I think what getting the reporting structure right is a big
Yeah.
part. Then I'd say a second part that comes to mind for me is winning credibility out of the gate. You were talking earlier about the kind of influence aspects of this
Mm-hmm.
position. Um, and it's pretty straightforward, I guess, but it comes down to how are you adding tangible value in each interaction? Um,
Uh-huh.
I, high say-do ratio, meaning you do the things that you say, and often in
Okay, good.
organizations that are running in many different directions that have some of these presenting symptoms that cause us to say, we need a strategy office. There's something about the say-do ratio has gone wrong. So showing
Mm-hmm.
that you can be a uh, dependable colleague driving things forward proactively, I think is really critical out of the gate. Bringing distinctive intelligence and perspective, often that'll be market intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
and then um, being a uh, a voice and an instrument of action in the organization.
Hmm.
Really resisting that pure advisor role where you're sort of hopping around, saying some smart stuff here and there, but
Mm-hmm.
instead pushing towards what are the implications for the managerial decisions that we're going to make in running the business,
Mm-hmm.
taking everything to brass tacks
And how do you manage that rhythm between thinking and doing, saying and doing, or and analyzing and actioning? Like I know, I know one strategy office that they basically do 3 months of board prep and thinking and strategizing, and then nine
Mm,
months of just on the ground execution and
wow.
operations. That's
Wow.
kind of the annual rhythm.
Hmm.
But that's just one way.
Yeah, I mean, I find that in a fast-growing company that is at the kind of stage that we are talking about today,
Mm-hmm.
you do need an annual rhythm because you need those teeth, you need the expectations, you need the visibility of the process. And then you probably need to break that pretty frequently because
Mm-hmm.
opportunities come up that were unexpected, because the market changes in ways that change our growth trajectory.
Yeah.
For all of the reasons,
Mm-hmm.
um, at that stage of maturity as a company, I think it is important to be willing to break and step outside of the process as well.
Mm-hmm.
For myself, the way I look at it, which I, don't know if it's right or wrong, is um, to uh, to externally have a throughout the whole year curious stance, to spend a substantial amount of my time just learning from colleagues, from folks who work at our
Mm,
competitors, from customers, from people in our field in policy, from economists, from folks who are close to technology evolution, um, from folks who founded companies recently. So
mm-hmm.
curious, open stance to the external world. And then internally, certainly curiosity as well about what, our internal experts, our colleagues who are living the business day to
Mm-hmm.
day are experiencing. They're our, best resource in many ways, most important people to work with. But also internally a stance that is constantly trying to drive towards what are the actual management actions that we would take based on the
Yeah.
issue we're presented with.
Yeah. 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 I feel it's sort of like an embodied the of the thinking and doing kind of embodied I don't know, integrated, I guess is kind of what I'm hearing. Um, we can skip that. Just forget that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm looking at the questions. There's two that I haven't asked, but I think that
Hmm.
we've kind of touched on them. But
Hmm.
and then maybe could probably have time for like one more question. Um, the one of them is who should the office report to, and you touched on that a little bit, but
Yeah, I think we
that's more
covered it.
explicit.
Yeah.
Okay, get. Um, and then what are the biggest mistakes companies make when standing up strategy office for the first time? That could be like an open for anything, but that could be a nice final question of like what did you not say kind of question,
Yeah.
or I can ask
Yeah.
something else. What do you think?
Yeah. Let's see. Maybe I'll take a swing at the what are the biggest mistakes and we'll see where it goes.
Okay, perfect,
Cool.
excellent. All right, this is fascinating, and I think at each of these we could double click, and there's more to go. But we're reaching the top of our time with you, so maybe just ask like this last question here. What when a company's standing up a strategy office for the first time, what are the biggest mistakes they make or they're likely to make?
I think it is often a version of this mistake we see in companies where um, we hope to solve a constellation of kind of unclear, sort of connected problems by hiring a mythical executive, by hiring an
Mm-hmm.
executive that will come in and, through the force of their experience and skill and charisma, take those things by the horns and resolve them. And
Mm-hmm.
I've very rarely seen that to really play out um, in companies, maybe particularly below the CEO level, to really play out that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think there's a version of that uh, sort of psychological state that often accompanies companies that say, we want to have a strategy office. There's just a sense that this group is going to get us in line. And uh, I think the great stumbling block is when we don't break that broad expectation into component parts that are achievable, reasonable, and clear to the organization. And so I think the biggest mistake single biggest mistake is often taking an incredibly broad and aspirational mandate and not putting clarity around it for yourself, but more for the organization and for your colleagues. So they really understand what you are doing, what they can expect of you, what you're going to expect of them, what the enterprise and board is going to expect of all of you around this work, and
Mm.
why.
Yeah.
And if you exist in the aspiration, it can be exciting at first, but I
Mhm.
think pretty fast it actually gets old for the company.
Yeah. I've got, it's raising a question, and I said we don't have time for
Yeah.
more for another question, but I do want to ask this question. Who does, like, they might say, let's start a strategy office and it will just solve everything. Then the CEO, CSO comes in and they're like, well, now we have to break it down and talk about what the mandate is and help them, kind of coach them to clarify what they actually want this office to do and what the outcome to be. Get that. But there's work now that the strategy office does. My question is, where does that work get taken from? Where was it done or was it not done before the strategy office was established?
Right. I think the answer is often you're going to have, you've had a successful company. You're going to have smart, great folks doing this work. They've
Mm-hmm.
probably been doing it in pockets.
Yeah.
And uh, and a lot of the early stages, I think, of standing something like this up is actually um, understanding what work has been happening in pockets and
Yeah.
uh, respecting that, honoring both the effort and what are likely uh, good, competent, thoughtful outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
and then up leveling it to focus on the needs of the organization, not of individual products, functions, teams.
Got it. Right, right, right. I see. So it's being done inside a product or a channel and optimized for that. And now you up level it. Got it. I love it. I love it. Okay. That's great. I mean, that would have been another thread to pull on. This has been really fascinating, Adam, and I love how kind of how thoughtful you are, and I want to appreciate you for taking the time to think this through and share it with us.
Thanks so
Extremely
much.
helpful.
It's
No, thank
really
you.
fun to talk about this stuff with
Yeah,
you.
awesome.